There's 30 million software engineers in the world. Most of them are intimidated by playing with hardware. Hardware engineers typically have not had great experiences working with software engineers. It just hasn't gone great over the last 30 years. And we're trying to completely bridge that gap. So you can get hardware engineers and software engineers working together in a much more tightly knit sort of cycle. And that changes everything. Right? A lot of hardware projects, robotics or otherwise, are stuck in a waterfall mentality because of the way people think about hardware and software together. And what we've seen in software is when you break free from that and you can be iterative, that's when things go really fast.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Today's guest is Eliot Horowitz, who is a longtime technology executive known for founding MongoDB, a pretty iconic company in the world of big data and internet databases. And his latest venture is called Viam Robotics. And what he's doing with Viam is essentially trying to democratize the ability to create robotics and write software for these robotics in a much easier way than was possible before. And so we talk about how he sees the world of robotics evolving, why he decided to build a horizontal enabling robotics platform that allows people to build vertically focused robotics applications and solutions on top of it, like food robotics, and where he sees this all going. Like you, I've been thinking a lot about how AI and robotics will change the world. And so this was a really good conversation. If you haven't already given us a review, please do so. Also, later this week, we'll be having a live conversation about how AI is changing the world of agriculture. If you want to listen to that, just go to The Spoon, check out the post on that. We'll also have a link in this podcast to the register for that. So, all right, folks, that's it for now. Let's get to my conversation with Eliot Horowitz. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Eliot Horowitz. I'm the CEO and founder of Viam.
Talk a little bit about your journey into robotics, because you were at Mongo before Viam, and before that you had a couple other startups. Why did you decide to go into robotics?
Yeah, so I was one of the founders of MongoDB, and I was there for 13 years. Left in 2020, and after goofing off for a little while, started tinkering in the real world again. Right? You do live in the real world. I like existing in the real world. And like I've done many times, I started tinkering with things with hardware and trying to make things work. And towards the end of 2020, I was sort of frustrated with how hard it was to bring robotics projects and other hardware projects into fruition and how to make them real. And if you talk to other software engineers, their experiences were not great. So how do you make that better? And that turned into Viam, right, which is a platform for robotics. Gambit, again, I eat food like many people.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy eating food and actually enjoy cooking as well. And a lot of people I talk to, want to cook, want to learn how to cook more, but are intimidated by it. And it's all about how do we make cooking and sort of day-to-day life better.
One of the things you talked about is this idea of this physical world having this critical technology gap. It is hard, and it has been hard to apply AI to real hardware. I think oftentimes software AI is been separated from the physical world of engineering. You were frustrated by this inability to kind of really make hardware work well. How does Viam do that? How do you kind of bridge these two worlds?
Yeah. So, Viam, it's a pretty big software platform, and It covers a lot of things. And what we really saw in the space was that there was a lot of interesting research done over the last 30 years in hardware. Batteries, motors, robot arms have gotten much better. A lot of interesting research in other directions, like in AI, right, and GPTs and all these things. That was really interesting. Also, lots of stuff happening in how to build big software projects, right? Go back 20 years ago, AWS didn't exist, right? So the way that people build software applications now is completely different than it was 20 years ago. By 25, 30 years when I started doing bigger projects, completely different. And a lot of what we saw in the hardware space was things hadn't been changed in a while. And it's different, right? Because you both have, a robotics project, an automation project is both a big software project and a big hardware project. And you need really great tools in both of those. And when you have tools that don't match, right? When you've got some cool tools in the AI space and in the software space that don't mesh with the hardware tools, that don't mess with the robotics and automation side of it, everything kind of gets messy and it just doesn't work. And people get frustrated, nothing happens. And there really hadn't been a evolution of the tools available to engineers in the space, right? And engineers in that case is software engineers and hardware engineers and automation engineers. And people were left kind of out, in the dark. And so we said, great, what we're going to do is we're going to build a tool, we're going to build a platform that lets engineers actually bring these projects to life, right? Really good tools for working with any hardware, tools for, building modern software on hardware, making it easier for software engineers and hardware engineers to iterate together quickly, letting you use AI in whatever way you want, whether it's, LLMs for your interfaces or just building models to do some basic, visual recognition, right? Bringing it all together in one place, that makes it really easy. When you do that, it lets people build things much faster than they could have possibly imagined before.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember the early days of the internet when it was really complicated to make a website, right? And now we have Squarespace and we have WordPress. And is that the logical end destination where we're going to basically get to the point where it's like you WordPress for robotics?
So it's actually a really great analogy. So we joke internally. That's one of the people here that I work with us on this a lot. We joke about, we were writing, PHP or Perl web applications, 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And if you dropped AWS into the hands of a Perl developer in 1998, they wouldn't know what to do with it, right? And that's sort of what we're trying to do, right? We're starting to say, okay, imagine how much harder it was to build a website in 1998 to now. And we're trying to make that same leapfrog happen in robotics. Now, it's not going to be exactly the same. I don't know exactly where it goes. And, we're not trying to build a no-code platform at this point, but it's really that size of an evolution, right? Going from, okay, building a robotics project is an enormous undertaking. You need hundreds of engineers to, you can actually build a legitimate production hardware project with real robotics and AI with an actual startup-sized budget. And that's where we're going.
Yeah, so you're not moving towards no code, but you're going to make it much easier and reduce a lot of the hurdles. And I've seen so many robotic startups in the food space come and go and die because this is such a hard space. And oftentimes the capital needed and then the sheer time needed is just years and years and hundreds of millions of dollars. And so do you ultimately see that this could shorten those timelines and reduce the capital cost by a significant degree?
Yes, but orders of magnitude. Right, what I see a lot in the robotic startups that haven't worked is getting to a somewhat interesting POC happens pretty quickly.
Yeah,
and then all the engineering you have to do to make it real ends up taking years and years and years. The other big thing we see is iteration time. Right, going from one version to the next version takes way too long. Right, what makes software able to move quickly? Right, when you can actually iterate fast, when you get a new one version, then another version, and it's like every hour you get a new version, and then you can test really quickly, or you can even iterate with users live, right? That's when magic happens. And how do you bring that to the robotic space? And that's what we're really focused on, is how do you bring that iteration time down? How do you bring that sort of POC to production time dramatically down? And also, how do you democratize robotics for every software engineer? There's 30 million software engineers in the world. Most of them are intimidated by playing with hardware. Hardware engineers typically have not had great experiences working with software engineers. It just hasn't gone great over the last 30 years. We're trying to completely bridge that gap so you can get hardware engineers and software engineers working together in a much more tightly knit sort of cycle, and that changes everything, right? A lot of hardware projects, robotics or otherwise, are stuck in a waterfall mentality because of the way people think about hardware and software together. And what we've seen in software is when you break free from that and you can be iterative, that's when things go really fast.
It's almost a cliche at this point that in order for robotics to really operate well in verticals like food, you need so much data and training data. And while due to things like synthetic data and simulated data, that's shortening a little bit. Are you addressing that part of the equation, or are you just making it easier to program for robotics and spin them up, but you still need to kind of do all this real world training?
So that belief is predicated on this idea that you're going to build models to just do all of the things.
Okay.
And that belief comes from the fact that historically building robots in not that way has proven incredibly challenging. So while I think that's a cool way of building them, I think that's not tomorrow. And, that's going to take a while to get those models right. And, I don't know exactly when that'll happen. It could be 3 years. It could be 20 years. I'm not sure. But what we've done is let you build actual products where you don't need to do that. We've got robots that are sanding boats, right? Sanding the hulls of boats in factories. And they use AI, but they're not sort of trained on people sanding boats, right? It's a program we wrote. And the thing
Yeah.
is that because of the platform that we built, it lets us write that software 100 times faster than you could have before. And that's the difference. And so, yes, we can use models, and we almost every project we do, and almost all of our customers are capturing a lot of this data so they can build more models, but it's not predicated on sort of having this massive store of data already ahead of time.
So in a sense, it's reducing the time and cost of that feedback loop, because oftentimes you create your first initial robot, take forever to get it to market, and then it would gather this data. But what you're saying is you could build them faster and cheaper and this get them into the real world and start gathering this data almost instantly.
And getting real feedback, right? And actually saying,
Right.
okay, why is it not working? And then you can actually make changes in real time. We've got some fun demos where people came to me and said, "Hey, this thing is cool, but it'd be cooler if it did this." Right? I don't know, we've got some fun wine pouring demos, and they're like, "It pours, but the pour isn't quite as pretty as we want it to be." And I'm like, "Great!" And 30 minutes later, it was better, or this was, and because of the platform, it lets us just move much faster than anyone else. And
You,
and it is a platform, right? It's not like
yeah.
it is a platform. Everything that runs on the robots is open source, so it is a platform designed for everyone to use, and that's what we're starting to see.
And you decided to not write or do a vertically specific robotic startup. You decided to create a platform that goes after a number of different verticals. You mentioned boat sanding. You're doing quick service restaurants. You're doing other verticals. Um, why is that? Because you kind of believe in the power of kind of going wide and all these different. It's a horizontal technology play.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what all these things need, it's 95% the same.
Okay.
I going back in time when Mongo came out, I was pushed pretty hard by a lot of people that we should verticalize it and be like, great, Mongo should be the database for this industry or that industry. And I was like, no, it's a database. And it made the early go to market days a little tougher, but it worked out in the end. And I think it's the same thing here, right? It's wide in many ways. What vertical you're in doesn't really matter from from the software standpoint. Not only that, but the kind of hardware you use doesn't really matter. If you've got one robot arm from one manufacturer or a different manufacturer, or it's on a dog or a humanoid, or it's just a little rover, it just doesn't matter, right? 90% of what you need is the same. All the integrations, you've got hardware and software, and you've got to do cloud deployments and diagnostics and debugging, and that's the kind of stuff that actually gets people bogged down. It's all the little things.
One of the things that I thought was interesting going back with Mongo is I believe you guys were open source from the early days, and I think you're taking a similar approach with Viam, right? And so, how do you build an open source robotics platform? And how do you monetize that?
Yeah, so it's unsurprisingly perhaps very similar to the Mongo business model.
Right.
So the core of the platform that's runs on the robots is open source. Why? One, we're building an ecosystem where we need drivers and integrations with every hardware and every sensor. I have never seen an ecosystem, a closed source ecosystem, take off. I don't think it's ever going to happen. That's one big reason. Two is security and privacy. Right? The IoT space has not exactly had a great security and privacy track record the last 20 years. And I think open source is one of the best ways to do that because, yes, it's open, but it means that everyone's looking at it. So when there are security issues, they're found. And we take security and privacy as sort of a paramount thing for us. And so that's a big one. And three is, we really want this to be ubiquitous, and we want this space to be democratized, right? We want there to be billions and billions of devices doing interesting things that, make people's lives better. And that open source is the best way to make that happen. Now, then it's also paired with a cloud service, just like at MongoDB, we had MongoDB Atlas. Here we've got a cloud service, which does a lot of the things that you don't want to do at the edge, right? That you have to have service for anyway. You got to store all the data. You've got to build AI models. You've got to deploy models and do fleet management and all of these different things that you have to do to actually build a real production system. And so that's the cloud service that people pay for. But it's unlike other stuff in this space, it's consumption based. It's, basically scales with how much you use it. And it's for stuff you have to pay for anyway. So it's a very fair, very democratized way of viewing the world.
Like like you, I've been frustrated with the state of smart home. I think I read in one of your previous interviews, you just felt like things weren't that smart, and just things in the kind
Yeah,
of the connected world weren't that smart. I have to wonder if like we're at a precipice where because of like new models and the advance of democratized robotics, things are going to get a lot more innovative, a lot more quickly. What do you kind of foresee over the next decade? Do you see this stuff, a lot more innovation happening?
I do. And I think, one of the big reasons we built VM is to enable that. But I do. And I think a lot of the, why are things not smart? If you could take a, quick step back, right? A lot of it is that there's sort of products that, don't really have APIs or don't have great APIs and that don't talk to each other. Why can't your sprinkler system talk to your security cameras? So if your kids go out to the play in the backyard, depending on your mood, the sprinklers either go on or off. Because the sprinkler systems don't really have APIs, and the cameras don't have ways to integrate and have hooks in there. And you know, if everything has APIs and everything's manageable, and you have you can actually have even like one login that lets you see all these different things, then you can start connecting things, and they can get smarter. So I think actually over the next 10 years, platforms like VM and all the things that we're working on will enable much smarter things like that. Where things are actually integrated and each one actually gets smarter. There's a lot of like great little products and niche products, and I think so much of what people want is them to communicate and to work together, especially in the home. Right? You've got your sprinklers and your pool and your, whatever it is. Like they should talk and know what's going on.
What do you think of some of the folks putting out and thinking about rolling out humanoid robotics? I think Neo just was announced in the last couple of weeks that you can get a robot next year for $500 a month. Are you looking at going down that path? Is that something that maybe Gambit Robotics would do maybe in the home kitchen at some point?
So we have, clients who are playing with humanoids, and we've, done some work in that space. For us, it is one platform that you can deploy
Okay.
VM on. It's not, in my mind, the most interesting one today. I am skeptical of a lot of the claims in that space. I think for things like Gambit, I think, do I want a humanoid in my kitchen with me while I'm trying to cook? Not necessarily, unless it was really good, and I'm skeptical of that.
Yeah.
But a robot arm embedded into the back wall of my kitchen that could manage everything on the stove for me, that could stir things and do, and add some ingredients at the right time or lower the temperature on a burner, that would be really useful, right? That doesn't require any breakthroughs. We have the technology, we have the software that we could do today. So there's a lot of middle steps that I think are very practical, very interesting, and can actually move the needle forward very quickly in really interesting ways. And I think it's a space that's, because of the lack of a platform like VM, people haven't really figured out how to do it. And that's what that's one of the things that we're really focused on, is enabling people to build these products that actually are not science projects, but that can be put into market immediately.
You mentioned this idea of robot arms coming out of the wall. I think it's been almost a decade since Molly Robotics debuted at CES, which is that crazy, for those who are us or kitchen tech nerds, a crazy robotic arm, full robotic system. And I think in the last couple of years, we've seen the likes of Chefy come to market. Would these be potential partners for you guys? Because they have been building hardware and you can maybe make their technology go further faster?
Yeah, absolutely. All of those are potential clients for ours. I haven't talked to either of those, but yeah, people like that who are trying to deploy things into the home and need better software tools to do it. Right? So a lot of the physical arms are actually pretty good now, and it's the getting the software to be what you need it to be is the challenge.
And you are doing, I think, work both in the commercial kitchen space as well as home. If I look at Gambit, it looks like it's a home play, but also I think you are working with Zabaro, building a pizza robots. Or are you doing both sides?
So we've got a few different things going on there. One of our customers is Appatronics, which has a pizza kitchen in a shipping container, effectively. That's probably not exactly their marketing message,
Right.
good way to think about it. But basically, a shipping container size thing or smaller that you could deploy to airports, to hospitals, to offices, where it's fully automated and it makes pizzas. We're doing some other work with quick service restaurants and other areas. So yeah, so we're VM has clients and partners in different areas, both on the commercial side and the residential side. Very different stories in both ones, but both super interesting.
When you look at the commercial kitchen space, when you look at restaurants, do you envision a world where 10 years from now, the vast majority, maybe back of house, will be robotics, or do you see front of house using robotics? What do you see happening there?
So if taking a step like even beyond restaurants for a second,
Right.
I think labor is a challenge now and is only going to get worse. And I think that, if you look at what restaurants want and the areas where they want the most help, things like dishwashing, right? There's a lot of jobs that people just don't want that are hard to keep filled. And I think those are the areas where there will definitely be more and more robotic solutions. Um, I've personally probably spent more time thinking about, back of the house, cleaning, loading dishwashers, washing glasses, things like that, more than the front of the house. I think people kind of want to interact with other people most of the time, but not a lot of people want to wash dishes. And so I think there's a lot of interesting things there.
You've been at the world of technology, been building interesting things since the 2000, maybe before that. And, Mongo was a pretty iconic company in terms of databases. What lessons can you say you've learned that you think will apply to the world of robotics that you learned from Mongo even before that?
Look, what made Mongo great was we built an incredibly great community that we listened to almost to a fault for a long time around making sure that they were able to build exactly what they wanted and get things done. And, one of the first things that was like an incredibly cool moment for me at Mongo was when someone from, I can't remember exactly the country, Southeast Asia, who couldn't afford Oracle and was trying to build a pretty important app for their country, came to me and said, yeah, Mongo was actually good enough that I could actually build this thing for free. And I wasn't, financially constrained because it was actually open source. And, that's meaningful. And that's pretty cool. And I think the lesson here is very similar, right? There are not enough people, there are not enough engineers building in this space. And if we can enable more and more engineers to build in this space and really build a platform that lets people work together and build great things, that's when things get really interesting, right? Because we've got good ideas, but there are millions of people who've probably got unbelievably great ideas of what you can do with this kind of technology. And it's our job to enable them to do it and to show them what's possible so that you can get a million people coming up with really cool ideas and actually bringing them to market. And that's, I think, what made Mongo great. And that's the same thing we want to do here.
My son was pretty well involved in the first robotics, high school robotics system that really, I think so many of the kids in the US learn robotics from. Do you ultimately see this type of technology what you're building going even down to like competitive high school robotics, people building at the very early levels?
Absolutely. We actually do a little bit of work with First Robotics, and I've been trying to figure out what it would take to modernize that stack a little bit.
Have you put a call to Dean Kamen yet?
Not directly yet, but there's actually so much interest in robotics and has been in the education space for a long time. Right. But so many of those things, whether it's First Robotics or Lego Mindstorms, because the space is so big and there wasn't a platform like Viam, end up being a little like toys. Yeah. And I think the thing that we've done, and I think we've proven it by this point, is that it's a platform that actually works great for people building serious robots like sanding boats, all the way down to people just learning how to put things together and can actually get started pretty quickly. AWS did it for that space, and I think we're doing it for the robotic space. But you really do want one platform that spans all the way from high school kids building, doing competitions in high school and tinkering, all the way up through people building, robots for as serious of use cases as you could imagine.
Eliot, how did you get started? You built some pretty iconic companies with Mongo. How did you get into technology and software engineering?
I started tinkering with computers early. My dad, who is not a professional computer person at all, was goofing around with computer games. This is on a Radio Shack, pre-Tandy, a Radio Shack computer.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I decided that I wanted to make them better and start editing them. So this is, going back to 1985, 1986, and just started tinkering. And, I think the thing that I do is I see problems and get frustrated by them. And then my frustration takes over and I'm like, why aren't the robots doing this? And why do I have to do this? And, then it just spirals from there. It's funny because I got into robots because I wanted more robots doing things that I didn't want to do. And I got into databases because I kept trying to do other things in the software space. And every time I did, we kept running into database problems. And so I was like, well, this is silly. Let's just build a database that actually works, which is great because now at Viam, we're using a lot of Mongo. and I don't have to worry about it because I just use Mongo for all the database things, and it works, and it's great.
Well, hopefully in a world in the future, we'll see more robots that are doing things that aren't as hard to bring to market, powered by VM technology. So, Eliot, I really appreciate you spending time with me today.
Yeah, it was great talking to you, Michael, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
All right, that's my conversation with Eliot Horowitz, who's trying to do what he did for the world of the internet and databases for the world of robotics. So I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. As always, like, subscribe, and give us a review. Thanks, folks. We'll talk to you soon.
If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with a friend? And don't forget to give us a 5-star review. You'll find more content like this on thespoon.tech/podcasts.